Good morning, good evening, good night, everybody. Welcome to this Q&A. This is going to be probably a bit of a longer video, and I'm sorry for that, but keep watching because I think this is a very important topic that we need to talk about regarding Commander, just as a format in general. This is a technical Q&A, but it's just for one question, because somebody commented this to me on one of my videos, and I thought it was really important that it needs to be talked about. Read it for you. Hi, I'm very new to MTG and I have only one pod commander game. You should talk to me. I'll get a commander game with you. Brimaz, the Blight of Rescos, is my newest commander, so I just wanted to ask on account of the commander format and Brimaz, Blight of Rescos, which I both play. What would you say about this claim I often personally encounter? Figure it out. Do not build a deck that's too powerful or you won't be able to play because the amount of hate you attract will strictly narrow your options. Other players will instantly remove your cards out of fear. Cards are probably unsubtle and too obvious with their threatening presence on the board. We will get to that in a second. I look for EDH decks on sites like EDH Rec and Scryfall, and I seem to be wary of adding cards that on their own really narrow down the amount of actions other players could do due to their individual and straightforward effectiveness. I commented out of many Brimaz the Rescos videos because I found yours to be the most interesting. Thank you so much for saying that mine was the most interesting, because thank you. I try to make decks that are strong but not too powerful, so there is some wiggle room to where you're like, I think this card might be a little too powerful. Take that and swap it for something a little less. Or if you're like, man, I kind of want to take this, but I think I would like these cards better, then I can show you guys the deck list, explain some of the cards in them, why I run them, and if you ever have questions about them, we can talk about them. So let's even just start right here. Look for EDH decks on sites like EDH Rec and Scryfall. Okay, I will admit I actually do use EDH Rec quite a bit for a lot of the cards that I had for a lot of my decks, because I feel like those websites are there for a reason. The reason why they have a lot of like, it works well in X% of decks, like works well with them, is because a lot of people have made decks and they found what works best with the deck you're trying to make. I think it is a really good tool, and obviously, yeah, you're getting a bunch of people who they might not have made them. But the more decks that you make, the more you can realize that maybe some of those aren't the best. You can come from other stuff being like, oh, well, you know, maybe I want to put Ancestral Mask in my Sithis deck, or maybe go, you know, a lot of people are running Rhystic Study, but and saying it's a really good card, but I've noticed every time I've played it that people are purposely trying to get rid of it or remove it because of how good of a card it is. And I understand, because there are cards that just kind of seem unfair when playing against them, such as cards like Soul Ring. That's one of the hot topics of cards that should probably be banned in Commander, because Soul Ring is way too easy to get and tends to make people not have fun whenever you play it. That's why I'm not gonna say my side on the Soul Ring debate, because that's a hot topic right there. But I would always recommend people, in especially decks like green, you don't need to run Soul Ring. And like a lot of green decks, honestly, I would rather you play Nature's Lore, Farseek, Skyshroud Claim. I'd rather you play those cards than play a Soul Ring, because in general, there would be a lot more synergies with it. Green tends to not have as many artifact synergies, and also it makes you less of a threat, because the whole point of the Commander format is there will always be threats and there will always be people who just kind of brood over there in the corner, and you have to keep both in check. Obviously, you want to take care of the threat first, because then they'll just go and take it over. Then at that point, it's the player who's brooding and doing all their stuff that then becomes the threat, but by that point, they're probably going to take over the game. That's why I would almost say that Brimaz, Blight of Rescos, is the perfect combo of those two, because there is a way to build this where you don't have to play those big flashy spells, but you don't have to play your Elish Norn Grand Cenobites. You don't have to play your Sholdred the Apocalypses. You don't have to play those. Because sometimes, like, if you're noticing that there are cards that the moment you play it, you become the big threat, I wouldn't necessarily say take them out of your deck. I would say wait to play them. Because in Bremaz, the whole point of Bremaz is literally just to gain value over time. It's a value train, being able to just get out a bunch of little tokens that can then proliferate, get a lot of like 1/1 counters on them, so that then if somebody decides to board wipe, if somebody decides to start getting rid of a bunch of your creatures, you can now have creatures at the ready in the back. I mean, obviously, if somebody's gonna board wipe with all non-land permanents, okay, that's completely different. But in general, it's supposed to be a Bremaz comes out. If somebody decides that, hey, Bremaz is way too strong for this table and we need to get rid of it, maybe adds, you know, your Lightning Greaves, your Swiftfoot Boots for Hexproof, Shroud, all that. Maybe add something else to make sure that they don't get rid of them. Or use a bit of diplomacy, because the whole point of Commander is supposed to be a bit of diplomacy. There's ebb and flows to the whole game. It's supposed to be fun. So playing this, like, I've played against it, and people have tended to say it's not too much of a problem until they look over at my side of the board. It tends to be one of those, I get out a bunch of artifacts, I just keep proliferating, and then I flip over a 14/14 that can immediately attack, because I've been having it there for like the whole game. And then people go, he might be the threat now. Well, how do you deal with me? You get rid of my one big creature, I have a bunch of others to get rid of. And you feel kind of bad getting rid of a token that you spent 2 mana to flip. Like, you're spending 2 mana for 2 mana that you're basically every single turn going to proliferate with the amount of like shenanigans with sacrificing and all that you're running in the deck. But do not build a deck that's too powerful. I would almost disagree. If you have only one kind of pod with Commander games, then I would almost recommend talking to them and asking, hey, can we possibly move up a little bit in power level? Or if you're physically unable to, or they're not able to, you might honestly consider getting a different play group, because there's time and places for all types of deck. I mean, the other day people were in one of the Discord servers I'm in were like, hey, let's all bring precons. I was at work at the time, but I totally would have loved to pull out the old Quantum Quandrix precon. It's one of my favorites, and I think is one of the strongest precons ever made, but it's still one of those, like, it's a precon. You can still have a lot of fun with precon. I've built in paper the Arcades deck. Arcades strategist, was it something strategist, whatever. Like, I would say that card is, I mean, that deck is like a low 7. It's got some powerful cards in it, but it's like a low 7, and it's at this good little rate where it can become the threat, but it's not too much of a threat. It's very easy to shut that deck down, but you can still have fun while doing it. Bremaz is one of those, you can have a lot of fun, and it just snowballs to a point. I wouldn't directly compare it to elf ball decks, but just for the sake of it, let's compare it to elf ball. Elf ball decks tend to be one of those, you play 1 mana 1/1 that taps for 1. Turn 2, you now have like 3 of them, until eventually you just keep going and going and going. You have so many 1/1s that tap for 1 or something of the sort that then people go, okay, what are we going to expect from it? We're going to expect a Crater Hoof. We're going to expect a Endrace Forerunners. Well, what if that doesn't come? What if you make an elf ball deck that runs it, but they'd expect they'd expect those Crater Hoof Behemoths, they'd expect those Endrace Forerunners, but at the same time, you could play your lords and things to just suddenly they become 2/2s that tap for 1. Okay, you get rid of that. They only spent like 3 or 4 mana on it. Okay, well, now he has multiple. Okay, now it's becoming a problem. But they just keep getting more and more out, and they're getting really strong. And they don't have to close the game with Crater Hoof Behemoth and Endrace Forerunners, because they can just slowly beat you down with all these little elves. And you don't quite know how to get rid of them, because how do you? It's kind of the same as Bremaz, where obviously Bremaz can very easily make the army. It doesn't have to be the only one to make it, because you can just play Phyrexians by themselves, and they just be good cards. I mean, heck, run Shoulder of the Apocalypse without Brimaz out, and suddenly they're spending the mana to get rid of it because they want to get rid of it. Or if they don't, it'll provide you pretty good value. But if you have Brimaz out, it's just that little cherry on top of being able to get an artifact then that you could pay 2 and flip it for now a 4/4. Probably Shoulder of the Apocalypse, but I mean, Brimaz is value, but it doesn't have to be your only value. I think that's what decks need to be. It needs to be there can be cards that are just good. That are just good and don't have to win the game. Obviously, if you play a deck like Urza, for instance, like Chief Artificer, then that's going to be a deck that's going to pop off and win the game like turn 2. But Brimaz can't really win the game turn 2. You're going to be playing a little bit more of a grindy, slow get up to the point where you can start swinging in for lethal. Elf Ball decks tend to be ones that don't really win on the early turns. They tend to slowly build up to the point where they've achieved critical mass. And there's multiple different types of decks with win conditions. Some of them are critical mass. Some of them are just, early aggression to then just swing in for lethal. Some of them, like, I don't know, Ramses, Assassin Lord, tend to have one of those just like, oh, suddenly I killed one player, I win. There's different types of decks. There's combo decks too. There's Magnus the Red with like storm creature tokens, whatever. My favorite deck to play at the moment is the Rakdos, Lord of Riots. It's just all about quick little burn here and there to eventually be able to combo off and get out a bunch of huge Eldrazi dragons to just absolutely kill the opponent. Seemingly nothing. And even cards like Stormfist Crusader in normal decks, normal red-black decks, or Gund or Grixis decks. Like Gund or Grixis decks. You'll look at Stormfist Crusader and go, oh, it's a 2 mana. I think it's 2/1 with Menace. But at the beginning of your upkeep, each player draws a card and loses a life. Okay, in normal decks, honestly, you'd probably not want to play it. You're giving your opponents cards and making them lose a life. They don't really care. You're giving everybody neutral card advantage at that point. Well, in a deck like Rakdos, you don't really care because suddenly you draw that card. If it's a creature card with Rakdos out, it's discounted by 3 mana. That's huge value, like insane value. That's like a quarter of an Eldrazi right there, sometimes even less. That's why I think Brimaz is one of those, like, there's an art form to it. There's a flow to it. Because Brimaz, you can pay that, like, 7 mana to get out that Elesh Norn Grand Cenobite. But the moment they get rid of it, well, you still have a 7/7 in the back that you could just pay 2 and flip over. And it will just keep growing the more Brimaz is out. You will always have value with it. That's why I think the make the deck not too powerful. It's not that hard. Make it too powerful. But, if somebody's like, hey, I think this card is way too powerful for it. Okay, maybe it is. Maybe there are decks like, I don't know, if you're playing, let's say, Rakdos Lord of Riots, and somebody said, hey, Ulamog or something is way too strong in it. Or Terror of the Peaks, for instance, is just way too strong and pushes it up maybe towards the level 8 play in that, like, in your pod. Okay, then maybe swap out Terror of the Peaks for, I don't know, Impact Tremors or something. It's a little bit less, but I mean, I run Impact Tremors in it also, but whatever. Let's say Fiery Emancipation, whatever, the triple all damage dealt to opponents. Okay, maybe they are like, hey, that is way too strong and kills people way too quickly. Okay, well, it's 6 mana. You have to get up to 6 mana. I'm not running a lot of, like, mana gain and all that. So if they're like, hey, I think this is too strong for it, which it shouldn't be, but then maybe, switch it out for another Eldrazi or something. It's little things that, like, if some people's 8s are other people's 6s. Some people's 6s are other people's 8s. there's people tend to just not want to go out and say, hey, your deck sucks, don't play it. Or that deck is way too strong, don't play it. People don't want to say that. That's why you just kind of go, hey, is this cool with my table? And if they're like, no, I really didn't have a lot of fun, okay, you could build a different deck. I don't know, check out some of my decks that I play and run. Or, you know, just swap a few cards out. Or there's always the possibility of getting a new pod. Want to join my pod? I would not mind doing that. But you won't be able to play because the amount of hate you attract will strictly narrow your options. I heavily disagree with that on the basis of, if people are refusing to play with you because they don't like the decks you play, I think that's a different reason. Like, there's only two people actually that I can ever remember that I didn't want to play with because I kept losing. And those two people, I did not want to keep. I wanted to stop playing with them, not because of the decks that they were playing, but because of how they played. There's a big difference between like playing mono blue fairies and pauper, or there's a big difference between playing that and, like, you know, having fun with it and just being like, you know, can't let that resolve, I'm gonna have to counterspell it. Man, yep, I saw that coming. Yeah, should have played around it. Or just going, no, I counterspell. Okay, cool, dude. Cool. Great. It was that dude, and then the dude who, when we were still playing, like, casual 60 card, I mean, this was like, you know, find what you find in your bulk boxes kind of play or whatever. This dude brought a competitive legacy elf list and refused to play anything else. And I was sitting there trying to play Ball Lightning Tribal. It was fun, okay? It was a Spark Elemental, Ball Lightning, a Lightning Skelemental. I mean, that deck was fun. It was fun, and it usually didn't win. But, like, it was one of those, he'd sit there playing this competitive, like, win on turn 4 with Elf Ball kind of legacy decks. And it just wasn't fun. But it's how you play. I mean, you could play pretty good stuff, but still have fun. There's an art of losing too. I mean, you could play against when I was playing Rakdos Lord of Riots at one point, there was 2 players playing stacks and another player playing a Gain Control Tribal. I was playing Rakdos, which is a creature-based deck. At one point, somebody Overwhelming Splendored me, and then another player Elish Norned me. So, you know, it's one of those. I didn't have a lot of fun, but I still had a bit of fun because at the end of the day, we were all having a bit of fun. Eventually, I managed to come back around because they claimed that they took care of me, and then 2 of the players died, and it was up to both of us. Well, the Overwhelming Splendor's off, the Elish Norn's off, and then I was able to get 2nd place. One of those, it's how you play, not necessarily the decks you play. There is to a point where some of the decks you play can come into effect. But there's like one guy in one of the tables I love to play with. His main deck is the new Heliod, the completed Heliod. That his whole deck is just taking his turn on your turn, kind of deal. He can do it multiple times in a go around. Like, I think that deck is way stronger than he thinks it is, but I could still have kind of fun because suddenly it becomes an archenemy game. And he doesn't mind that. If he didn't want it to be an archenemy game, okay, then we'll talk about him. And if he's like, hey, I didn't have a lot of fun that game, okay, well, maybe there was a reason for it. I don't know. There comes a point where even like some of the most common cards can be strongest. It's just up to you and your players, just how you want to play it, how you want to go about determining power level and all that. Because I am very straightforward with how my decks play. I will straight up be like, hey, I kind of want to play insects. You know, I'm going to be doing my own thing, milling myself, reanimating a bunch of insects. I want to make a field full of insects. And people can go, you know what? okay, and I know that that deck has some pretty strong cards in it and has a decent win rate. Well, I played against people, and they'll suddenly be like, oh, he's not the threat. And then I get an army of insects, and they go, oh no, he's suddenly the threat. Okay, well, I very clearly told you guys, hey, I am gonna play this reanimator-based, like, insect swarm, like, insane deck. And they're like, oh, well, he's not the issue. Okay, well, next time they'll know I'm the problem. So then we come to this weird balance of I'm not quite the threat, I'm also not the threat. So as long as you tell people kind of what the deck is and like what some of the, if they know some of the cards that you're playing, like if they know you're gonna play a Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe, and you play Mana Crypt, Mana Vault, some of those high-end like competitive cards, then you know there might be a chance that they'll hate you because you're trying to play up at this level like 8, 9 power level, but they're trying to play at like a 7. So there's some sort of finesse where you have to kind of talk to your players, kind of understand where you're coming from, what you're going to play. And the more you play against, especially other people, the more you'll understand what the power levels are of your decks. So I do not mind playing with anybody. If they wanted to comment on a video, like asking to play Magic or anything, I'll usually available after 6 or so EST, Monday through Friday. Saturdays and Sundays I'm always free, unless you know I say otherwise, but I'm always down because I've got decks for any power level. I can even show you guys decks for any power level because there's stuff like, even like Rakdos is fun and it's strong, but it has never popped off. I think the earliest it has popped off, I believe, was 5 or 6, and it was I straight up looked at the board and went, I think I can pop off, and I popped off, but none of my stuff had haste, so I would then be able to get close to the win on the next turn. But it's like that deck I would consider to be like a higher level casual deck, because they're casual and extremely casual. Because if you're playing like probably playing close to like a 7 point. If you're playing more competitive, higher end competitive deck, but then if you're playing really casual, you're probably playing if you found in your bulk box kind of deal. You're playing your pre-cons. It's, you know, just lighthearted fun. You don't want to get too competitive with it. But let's say a deck like Crick, for instance, Crick, Son of Yawgmoth. That's my casual competitive deck. That is a low-end competitive deck that can theoretically win on turn 1 or more consistently turn 2. It can theoretically win like on turn 2. Is it going to? No, it will not win. But there are some worlds where I can just pop off, do my own thing, and just win out of nowhere with a bunch of like life exchange shenanigans and suddenly go, okay, I ping you all for 2, you all lose the game. There's a world where it can happen. But in the worlds when it doesn't, then I take my second turn, go down to 4 life and go, welp, I passed the turn. And then people go, what all did you do on your turn? I went down to 4 life, I'm down to 2 cards in hand, and I have a Crick who's a 7/7 with lifelink. That's all I did. Like, decks can be really fun. That's why there are some decks that I refuse to play just because I really don't want to be that guy at it where I'm like, oh, well, play this. Even like Sir Gwyn, Hero of Ashvale, is like a lower powered competitive deck, I would believe. I'd say one of the strongest Voltron decks out there, but it's also one of those like you're probably gonna lose because it's strong, not that strong. So like if you were gonna play casual with it, it'd be high-end casual. It's competitive. Like Lothril, for instance, Blade of Elves or Blade of something, I don't remember. Like that is a pretty competitive deck. That is, like, elves are good, period. Like, you cannot say elves are not good. That's why a lot of people say that Atraxa is not a casual commander, because Atraxa just by herself is a really good card. You could play whatever you want with it. You can play just the splash of Infect, and suddenly that becomes the problem. Play 1/1 counters. That's a huge problem now. You can play a bunch of charge counter shenanigans, and it's a really bad, like, it's a really big problem. But it's way better than Brimaz. I would definitely say if people are comparing Brimaz to Atraxa, we have a different problem, because Atraxa is way better than Brimaz, and if they're trying to say that Brimaz is like this insane card with so much value, well, it's value. Sure, it's a value train, but it's also not Atraxa level of, oh my god, this card broken. It's something that you have to actually set up. You have to start actually, like, casting your spells and caring about what you're casting, and you're playing Phyrexian Tribal. I mean, tribals are good, but Phyrexian Tribal isn't, like, yes, it's gotten some support obviously over the past couple sets, but it's one of those that, like, you don't really have to mess a whole lot with. You just kind of sit over there, he'll gain his value and whatever. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to comment down below on this video, or ask me if you want to join the Discord that I'm in. I don't mind playing, or if you want my Discord, whatever. Or just comment on one of my videos if you want to play, like, in private. Go ahead. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you got all the way through this, please make sure to like and subscribe. And if you have any more questions, like I said, I do not mind answering them. These will probably be just one of those, you know, if I like your question, I'll maybe put it in like a list, or if it's a question like this, I can make a whole video about it. So thank you so much for watching. See you guys in the next video.